Iraq, end quote. I'd be interested in hearing our witnesses' professional and legal opinions on the executive's authority to issue such statements, especially in the realm of foreign policy and defense. I also understand that the administration has finally come around, consulted members of the Foreign Affairs Committee about the agreement in a closed setting. Administration officials, as has been stated here time and again, declined to come and openly testify. If they're serious about transparency and openness, then they should come to testify rather than keeping the public in the dark and the Congress in the dark. I have the honor of serving on the Budget Committee, and we heard from Mr. Nussel yesterday or the day before yesterday, where the President's budget asked for $70 billion for Iraq and Afghanistan. General Gates says that it ought to be $170 billion. Nowhere, anywhere in any discussion is what our costs will be as a result of this declaration of principles and what that means. So the total just bypassing what the impact of this effort will be. We've been in Iraq for nearly 5 years. I have introduced the Iraq Strategic Agreement Review Act about talking about our long-term relationship in Iraq. We have been there 5 years. A clear majority of Americans believe we should bring our troops home as soon as possible. And in part, this Congress was elected out of dissatisfaction with this war. President must not be permitted to unilaterally tie the hands of his successor. We in the Congress have the right, we have the responsibility to help to plan our future course on an issue of such import to this nation. I am looking forward to our witnesses' testimony.
We're going to begin with Dr. Macgregor, and we'll just go down to the right. So if you would proceed, Colonel.
Hit that button.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. What I would like to do is make a relatively short presentation focusing on just 3 points, some of which will echo some of the comments that have already been made. First, I think it's important that whatever course of action the Bush administration decides to follow in Iraq, it should not pretend under any circumstances that a major U.S. defense commitment, internal and external to Iraq, is a matter for resolution inside a status of forces agreement. A status of forces agreement exists preeminently to protect the legal rights of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines permanently stationed on foreign soil in a country that is hosting a permanent or semi-permanent U.S. military presence. It also is, from the vantage point of those of us who were soldiers, and I might add here that I served for 8 years of my 28-year career outside of the United States, 6 of those in Germany and 2 of those in Belgium, and so I frequently interacted with German federal authorities for a whole range of reasons, and I can tell you that the Status of Forces Agreement not only protects U.S. forces, but it creates a framework through which we then can communicate with the local citizenry and its government to ensure that whatever conflicts do arise are quickly resolved. But there is no language, as far as I am aware, in either the Korean SOFA or the German SOFA, which to my knowledge are the most important given the numbers of forces involved, that stipulate when, where, or how U.S. military power will be employed against either external or internal enemies. Those things are normally reserved for treaties involving mutual defense. And the SOFA itself, in its legal basis, flows from mutual defense treaties in both Germany and Korea. The second point is that I think any elected official contemplating the commitment of U.S. forces to the survival of a government like Iraq's, a government that already confronts powerful armed opposition inside its own borders, should recognize the potential damage that the government's reliance on U.S. military power would cause its legitimacy. The best strategy for the United States, in my view, is to stay out of Iraq's internal conflict until that is resolved and a new legitimate Iraqi leadership emerges without direct U.S. military support. And finally, an open-ended pledge by the United States government to commit its military establishment to the defense of the Iraqi government in Baghdad against internal enemies on the grounds that the United States is defending, quote-unquote, a democratic system, something that I think is at least misleading, if not fundamentally untrue, seems to me uncomfortably close to the old Soviet notion of defending socialism in Central East Europe inside the Warsaw Pact, which ultimately was an excuse for intervention to prop up unwanted communist regimes in Central and Eastern Europe. So those are the three basic points that I wanted to make, and I'll now yield to my distinguished fellow witnesses.
Let me get to the issue of the sofas. I noted where Secretary Gates, and by the way, I do share that opinion of Secretary Gates. I think he's a man that's forthcoming and is a man of great integrity. I welcomed his assumption of that particular position. But he made this statement: more than 90% of this will be a pretty standard sofa. Well, he didn't make this statement. This is a quote from some senior official and who is involved in drafting the American proposal. It is not something that will bind the hands of the next president. I think maybe it's that other 10% that causes us some concern. We also have read statements from anonymous officials. In fact, General Lute also equated it to a typical sofa. But Dr. Wedgwood, you just raised the issue that I want to raise. Let me begin with Dr. Macgregor about the issue of expanding immunity or expanding the terms of the SOFA to private contractors. Are there other SOFAs that implicate the substantive provisions of SOFAs to private contractors? And if not, or even if they do, in the opinion of any of you, would that require congressional approval? Let me begin with Dr. Macgregor.
Well, I know that the treaty between the United States and Korea involves some provisions that address supporting elements of the U.S. Armed Forces that are not necessarily uniformed. This is also true to some extent in Germany. But I think what we're discussing, which is this issue of immunity in the context of Iraq, is well beyond anything that we currently have in any of the status of forces agreements. Of course, for me personally, the other question I have is, with whom are we negotiating this SOFA? I don't regard the Iraqi state as a nation state. I don't regard Mr. Maliki and his government as legitimate. Does Mr. Maliki speak for the Sunni Arab tribal sheikhs in Anbar province? Does he speak for the other Sunni Arab insurgent forces now funded by the U.S. military as independent militias? Does he speak for Shiite militias in the south, particularly Muqtada al-Sadr? Does he speak for the effectively independent Kurdish state in the north? I'm not sure we're being honest with ourselves. What are we actually negotiating, and with whom are we speaking?